They called her the Black Widow of Dead Man's Gulch. Some swore she poisoned men with a kiss. Others claimed they saw her walking the desert at midnight, whispering to ghosts. But I knew the truth. The night her husband was shot down, something inside Lila Holt shattered, and something else was born. In this story, you'll discover how a grieving bride turned into the most feared widow of the Wild West. A tale of love twisted into vengeance, of secrets buried deeper than graves, of a woman who carved her legend from blood and fire. If you're new here, hit subscribe and saddle up, because every week we ride into another forbidden romance and deadly secret of the frontier. Now, let's begin. The morning after Samuel Holt was buried, Dead Man's Gulch woke to silence. No hammer rang from the blacksmith's forge. No piano stumbled from the saloon. Even the roosters crowed late, as if the town itself hesitated to face the day. Lila Holt stood by her window, the shutters cracked just enough to watch the street. She wore black silk, veil pulled low, a shadow of a woman she no longer recognized. Her hands were pale against the fabric, trembling not from fear, but from the weight of what she held inside. The neighbors whispered that grief had hollowed her. "Poor girl," they said, voices soft but sharp enough to cut. "She won't last the winter." Others were less kind. "A widow at her age? Mark my words. She'll remarry before the year is out, or waste away." Lila heard them all. She let their words wash over her like the rain had washed Samuel's blood into the dirt. Outwardly, she was every inch the grieving widow, quiet, fragile, obedient to sorrow. But inside, the storm was only beginning. By night, she paced the wooden floorboards of her empty house. Step, step, pause. Step, step, pause. The rhythm became a heartbeat, steady, relentless, driving her forward when sleep would not come. On the table lay Samuel's revolver, polished, oiled, waiting. Next to it, a folded scrap of paper, a list: Boone Carter, Jack Cutter, Royce Tate, 3 men. The last to see Samuel alive. The ones who rode with him that night and returned without him. They swore they'd been ambushed, that Samuel never stood a chance. But in the dark, Lila replayed every detail Samuel had told her before that final ride, the gold shipment. The route only a handful of men knew, the nervous glance Boone couldn't hide. Her grief sharpened into suspicion. Her suspicion hardened into purpose. The widow's veil became a mask, and behind it, Lila planned. The first test came at church. On Sunday morning, she walked through the square, black dress trailing dust, veil hiding her eyes. People parted as she passed, some bowing heads in sympathy, others watching with the hunger of gossip. Inside, the preacher spoke of mercy, of forgiveness, of the Lord's plan. Lila sat silent in the front pew, hands folded, but her mind was elsewhere. Forgiveness was for the innocent. Boone and his men were not innocent. When the sermon ended, Boone himself strode down the aisle, hat in hand, boots heavy on the wooden floor. He knelt beside her pew, voice low and slick. "Lila, Samuel was a good man, a brave man. I swear to you, we did all we could." Her eyes flicked to him from beneath the veil. His face was lined with false sorrow, his breath laced with whiskey. "All you could," she repeated, her voice flat. Boone shifted, searching her tone for something: weakness, maybe, or forgiveness. He found neither. "Dead Man's Gulch ain't the same without him," he added. "If you ever need anything, I need the truth," she said, cutting him short. The words hung in the air like smoke. Boone blinked, taken aback, before forcing a smile. "The truth is, the frontier don't spare good men. That's all their island. He tipped his hat and left, his spurs ringing like a challenge. But Lila's suspicion only deepened. That night, she lit a single lantern and spread her husband's maps across the table. Her fingers traced the ridges and trails, the routes marked in Samuel's careful hand. The shipment had been secret. Only 4 men had known. 3 came back alive. She whispered his name once, like a vow. Then she folded the map, tucked the revolver into her belt, and stepped into the night. The mask of mourning had fooled the town. She was hunting. The saloon doors moaned as they swung open, a long, tired sound that silenced the room. Smoke curled in the lantern light. Cards froze midair. Dice hung on the edge of tables. Even the piano man stopped, his hand hovering above the keys, because it wasn't just anyone who walked in. It was her, Lila Holt, widow. Grief draped over her shoulders like mourning cloth, but her eyes cut sharper than any blade. She wore black still, veil gone, her hair pinned in a knot that bared her pale face to the room. At her hip gleamed Samuel's revolver. A hush rippled through the gamblers, the drunks, the painted girls leaning against the balcony rail. They had never seen a woman like her step into a place like this, not a grieving widow, not in Dead Man's Gulch. She walked slow, measured. Every bootstep echoed like a hammer striking a coffin nail. She didn't glance left or right. She didn't need to. The room belonged to her from the moment she entered. She stopped at the bar. "Whiskey," she said. The bartender froze, rag limp in his hand. He was a man who had seen more brawls than sermons, more bullets than prayers, but his jaw tightened now, not from fear of her, but from fear of what her presence meant. Trouble. Reckoning, he poured. She didn't drink. In the far corner, 3 men sat with their backs to the wall. Boone Carter, Jack Cutter, Royce Tate, the last to see Samuel alive. Boone leaned back in his chair, the lamplight catching the scar on his jaw. He had the look of a man who believed the town bent to his will. Cutter, lean and restless, twirled a coin between calloused fingers. Royce, quiet as always, stared at the table as though it might open and swallow him whole. Boone tipped his hat. "Well, if it ain't Mrs. Holt." Her gaze cut to him, hard and steady. "It's Widow Holt now. Don't you forget it." The room held its breath. Cutter chuckled nervously, but the sound died when Lila's hand brushed the butt of her revolver. Royce shifted in his seat, muttering something too low to catch. Boone smirked, but it didn't reach his eyes. "We did all we could," Boone said. "Samuel was outnumbered, outgunned. If it weren't for us, you'd have buried more than 1 man that night." Lila tilted her head, veil of grief, slipping just enough to show the steel beneath. "All you could," she echoed, her voice flat. Boone's smirk twitched. Cutter leaned forward, restless. Royce wouldn't look up. Lila let the silence stretch. Then she lifted her glass, touched the whiskey to her lips, but didn't drink. Her eyes never left Boone's. The saloon had seen men shot over spilled cards, over insults half heard. But this was different. This was something older, deeper, a reckoning rising from the grave. I stood by the stair rail, watching from the shadows. To the others, it looked like madness, a widow chasing ghosts. But I knew better. She wasn't chasing. She was marking. She had walked into the lion's den not to beg for answers, but to let the lions know she wasn't prey. Boone shifted, his chair groaning. Cutter's coin slipped from his fingers and clattered to the floor. Royce muttered a curse, low and bitter. Lila didn't flinch. She set the glass down without drinking, the thud sharp as a pistol cocking. "Enjoy your whiskey, Boone," she said, her voice carrying through the hush. "It might be your last." The words struck like a bullet. Men stirred. The piano man muttered a prayer. A gambler grabbed his hat, ready to leave before the storm broke. But Boone only smirked, leaning forward, eyes cold. Careful, widow. Folks might start thinking you've got death in your mouth. Her lips curved, not in a smile but in something sharper. Maybe I do. And with that, she turned and walked out, her boots steady. Her veil of mourning burned away to reveal what she truly was. Not a widow, not a victim, a storm in black silk. That night, the saloon learned. She hadn't come for whiskey. She had come for war. The storm rolled in heavy that night, clouds tumbling like black cattle across the sky. Rain lashed the rooftops, rattled shutters, hammered the muddy street until it looked more like a river than a road. Dead Man's Gulch curled in on itself. Lanterns dimmed, doors barred, the town praying the night would pass without blood. But some nights are born for blood. Lila Holt slipped through the storm like a shadow cut from darker cloth. Her black dress clung to her frame, hem caked with mud, Samuel's revolver heavy at her hip. The wind whipped her hair loose, and the rain plastered it across her pale face. But her eyes burned clear as lanterns. She wasn't walking aimless. She had a plan. Earlier that evening, when Boone swaggered from the saloon, his boots loud, his laughter louder, she'd been waiting. She left a scrap of paper where he'd find it pinned under a stone by the trough. The words written in Samuel's hand. Words Boone would recognize at a glance. Widow's Bluff. Midnight. Come alone. It was a lie, of course. Samuel had never written it. But Boone's pride was a sickness, and pride would drag him to the bluff, even if his gut told him otherwise. Lila knew men like Boone. They'd rather risk their lives than let a challenge pass unanswered. Midnight came. Widow's Bluff jutted out over the gulch, a jagged finger of rock where the wind howled like the dead. Lightning split the sky, painting the world silver and black. The abyss below roared with the swollen river, a hungry mouth waiting for fools. Boone came first, coat flapping, hat pulled low against the rain. He carried his revolver loose in his hand, more for show than need. Cutter and Royce trailed him, defying the note's demand, loyal like dogs who didn't know whether to bite or run. But Lila was already there. She stood at the cliff's edge, silhouette carved by lightning, black dress whipping, hair wild, revolver steady in her hand. She looked less like flesh and bone than a spirit risen from the grave, called by storm and vengeance. Boone stopped, sneer twisting his lips. You've got guts, widow. I'll give you that. Her voice cut through the storm. You know why Samuel died, Boone? Boone chuckled darkly. Because he wasn't quick enough. Her eyes narrowed. Number. He died because he trusted you. Cutter swore under his breath. Royce shifted uneasily. Boone's smirk faltered, jaw tightening. You're talking nonsense. Boone spat. Am I? Lila's voice was sharp, steady. Samuel told me things. About the gold shipment. About the route only 4 men knew. 3 came back. 1 didn't. And I'm looking at the reason why. The storm roared. Cutter's hand twitched near his pistol. Royce's face paled. Boone's eyes blazed. Fury and fear twisting together. You don't know what you're saying, Boone snapped. I know enough. Her hand closed on her revolver. The lightning cracked, and in that blinding flash, time split. Boone lunged, gun rising. Cutter cursed, fumbling for steel. Royce stumbled back. Lila fired. The bullet slammed into the mud between Boone's boots, spraying dirt. She hadn't aimed to kill, not yet. She wanted him to taste fear first. The same fear Samuel had tasted when Betrayal found him. Samuel died with your name on his lips, she shouted over the storm. I'll carve it into the earth myself if I have to. Boone snarled, rage stripping the swagger from his face. Cutter's bravado cracked, his hand trembling on the grip of his gun. Royce dropped his pistol entirely, the clatter lost in thunder. The standoff stretched, the storm itself holding its breath. And me, I watched from the ridge above, rain soaking my coat, heart hammering in my chest. I'd followed her, not out of pity, but out of hunger, for truth, for justice, for the story. And what I saw that night was no longer a widow. It was vengeance, alive and walking. When the lightning flashed again, Lila lowered her revolver, her voice colder than the rain. This isn't over, Boone. This is just the beginning. The wind tore the words from her lips, carried them across the gulch, etched them into the bones of every man who heard. Boone's face twisted, but for the first time, he didn't have an answer. And as Lila turned and disappeared into the storm, Deadman's Gulch understood. The widow wasn't hunting justice. She was hunting war. The storm broke by morning, leaving the town washed raw. Mud sucked at wagon wheels, shingles sagged under the weight of rain, and the air carried that strange, sharp scent of earth, turned over by lightning. Deadman's Gulch rose slow from its sleep. Folk peering through shutters, whispering about what had passed in the night. They didn't have the details storms blur sound, and men lie to protect their pride, but one thing was certain. The widow had called Boone out, and Boone hadn't silenced her. That was enough to set tongues wagging. By noon, the whispers had reached every corner of town. The schoolhouse, the blacksmith's forge, even the church where Reverend Pike preached mercy with hands still stained from card games. The widow wasn't a figure of pity anymore. She was a question, sharp and dangerous. What happens when a woman refuses to bow? At the edge of town, Lila sat in the small cabin that had been hers and Samuel's. The hearth was cold, the air stale. She had avoided the place since burying him, afraid of the silence, afraid of the memories. Now she forced herself through the door. The floorboards creaked like old bones. Dust coated the mantel where Samuel's pipe still lay, unsmoked. His boots sat by the door, one tipped on its side, laces dangling. The chair he'd carved during long winters leaned against the wall, a groove worn smooth where his hand had always rested. She touched everything once, her fingers trembling, not with grief, but with resolve. These were relics, ashes of a life burned out. She had no use for ashes anymore. Her eyes found the chest beneath the bed. She dragged it into the light. Inside lay Samuel's journal, weathered, leather cover worn soft, pages inked with a hand she knew better than her own. She opened it. The words leapt at her. Routes, numbers, names. Samuel had written everything down. Not just about the gold shipment, but about Boone's dealings, Cutter's gambling debts, Royce's sudden wealth. Her husband hadn't been blind. He had known betrayal was coming. He just hadn't lived long enough to stop it. Tears blurred the ink for a heartbeat, but she wiped them away, jaw tightening. The journal wasn't a record anymore. It was a weapon. Later, in the saloon, the men gathered again. Boone's temper simmered, his pride bruised. Cutter paced like a caged wolf, muttering about how the widow needed to be taught her place. Roy sat quiet, nursing a drink that had long gone warm. Boone slammed his fist against the table. She thinks she can scare me? She's a woman in black with a dead man's gun. That's all. Cutter spat. A woman with the whole town whispering her name. That's worse than any bullet. Boone's eyes darkened. He knew Cutter was right. Power in Dead Man's Gulch wasn't measured in bullets alone. It was in fear, in whispers, in the way men crossed the street when you passed. And for the first time, whispers weren't on Boone's side. We end this, Boone growled. But before he could lay a plan, the saloon doors swung wide again, and there she was. Lila stood framed in the doorway, Samuel's journal clutched in one hand, revolver at her hip. Her dress was still black, but her veil was gone. Her face uncovered, unafraid. "You boys look comfortable," she said, voice steady. "Shame it won't last." The room froze. Boone's hand twitched. Cutter cursed under his breath. Royce stared at his boots. "You killed my husband," she said, holding the journal up high. "And I've got the proof." Gasps rippled. The saloon, always hungry for spectacle, leaned in. Boone sneered. "That's a dead man's scribbles. Nothing more." "Then you won't mind if the marshal reads it," Lila said. The name struck like lightning. Marshal Greeley wasn't a man swayed by gold or threats. He was hard, old, and meaner than the desert Sunday. If the widow put the journal in his hands, Boone's empire would crumble overnight. The silence was heavy as gunmetal. Then, slow, Lila laid the journal on the bar. She didn't hand it to the bartender, didn't press it into anyone's palm. She just set it down where every eye could see. "Tomorrow," she said, "I ride to the marshal. Anyone who tries to stop me will answer to more than a widow's grief." Her eyes swept the room, steady, fearless. Then she turned and walked out. The storm outside had passed. But inside the saloon, thunder still rolled. Boone sat frozen, rage coiled tight. Cutter muttered curses, hands shaking. Royce, pale and quiet, downed his drink in one swallow. The widow had turned their own fear against them. And as the door swung closed behind her, the truth settled heavy over Dead Man's Gulch. Lila Holt was no longer mourning. She was making war. The sun fell heavy over Dead Man's Gulch, painting the street in long shadows. Dust rose with every footstep, hanging in the heat like smoke from a fire that never burned out. The town waited, silent, knowing something would break before the day was done. Boone Carter was not a man to be cornered. Pride and fear drove him meaner than ever. He and Cutter walked the street like wolves stripped of their den, guns loose in their hands, eyes darting. Royce trailed behind, pale as ash, sweat shining on his brow. Word of the journal spread fast. Some said the widow had proof, others swore it was a bluff. But the truth didn't matter. Belief mattered, and belief was turning the town against Boone. That morning, shopkeepers kept shutters low. The blacksmith closed early. Mothers pulled children from the street. Everyone knew, when power slips, men like Boone spill blood to take it back. Lila prepared in silence. She saddled Samuel's horse, a bay gelding with a scar across its flank, and strapped the journal tight to her saddlebag. Her revolver gleamed, cleaned, and loaded. Her black dress was torn at the hem, mud-stained, but she wore it like armor. Before she mounted, she knelt at Samuel's grave behind the cabin. The cross was simple, the earth still fresh. "They'll try to stop me," she whispered, fingers pressed to the cold wood. "But I'll carry this through, Sam. I'll see your name cleared. I'll see theirs burned." The wind rustled the grass, carrying her words away. She mounted, heels pressing the horse into motion. She didn't look back. By afternoon, the town gathered like dry tinder waiting for a spark. Men lingered on porches, women clutched shawls, children peeked from behind skirts. The widow rode down the main street, dust swirling around her, the journal secure at her side. Boone stepped out from the saloon, Cutter flanking him. Royce pale as a ghost. "Going somewhere, widow?" Boone's voice carried, low and sharp. "To the marshal," she answered, loud enough for all to hear. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Boone's jaw tightened. "Not with that book, you ain't," he said. Her hand brushed Samuel's revolver. "Then take it from me." The street froze. For a moment, time held its breath. The crowd, the heat, The dust. Everything waited. Then Boone drew. The crack split the street wide open. His bullet tore dust at her feet. Lila fired back, Samuel's revolver steady, the shot grazing Boone's sleeve. Cutter cursed, fumbling for his pistol. Royce stumbled back, eyes wide, shaking his head. The crowd scattered, screams tearing the silence. Doors slammed, shutters banged shut, but no one truly left. Every eye watched from shadow, from sliver cracks, from behind curtains, because this was the moment they had been waiting for. The widow versus Boone, justice versus power, blood in the dust. Boone lunged forward, firing again. The shot missed, chipping wood from the trough. Lila swung off her horse, landing hard, knees buckling but steadying fast. She rolled, came up on one knee, revolver raised, their eyes locked. For years, Boone had ruled Dead Man's Gulch with nothing but fear and steel. But fear had shifted, and steel in her hand was steadier than his. The next crack echoed like thunder. Boone staggered, hand clutching his side, blood seeping dark across his coat. He growled, teeth bared, eyes blazing hatred. But it wasn't enough. Cutter, panicked, raised his pistol, but his hands shook. Lila turned, fired once. The bullet struck the ground at his feet, a warning more terrifying than death itself. He dropped the gun, hands raised, breath coming fast. Royce fell to his knees, muttering, "I didn't want this. I never wanted this." The street fell silent, but for Boone's ragged breaths. He dropped to one knee, blood-soaking dust, pride bleeding faster than his wound. Lila stepped forward, revolver steady. "This is for Samuel." Boone spat blood, sneering even as the strength drained from him. "You'll never be rid of me, widow. Men like me, we don't die. We linger." Her eyes narrowed. "Then I'll bury you twice." The final shot rang out. Boone collapsed, face pressed to the dirt, dust rising around him like smoke from a fire finally smothered. The town didn't cheer. They didn't move. They just watched as Lila holstered Samuel's revolver, picked up the journal, and swung into the saddle once more. She didn't shout victory. She didn't claim glory. She simply rode on, the dust swallowing her, leaving Dead Man's Gulch to whisper of the day the widow turned the street red. The dust had barely settled when the town began to breathe again. Shutters cracked open. Faces peered into the street. Children clutched their mothers' skirts. Men stood stiff with hats clutched to their chests. Boone Carter lay cold in the dirt. His reign ended not by rival guns, not by drunken brawls, but by a widow's hand. Cutter slunk into the shadows, stripped of his bluster. Royce fled, eyes hollow, his soul broken long before the widow's bullet shattered Boone. And Lila? She didn't stay to bask in victory. She rode. Samuel's horse carried her down the long road out of Dead Man's Gulch, hooves striking rhythm into the silence. The journal weighed heavy in her saddlebag, but not heavier than the memory of the man who had written it. Every hoofbeat whispered the same truth. Samuel had trusted her to finish what he started, and she had. But justice is a hungry thing. It never ends with one name, one grave, one bullet. She knew the West would test her again, knew the shadows of men like Boone still stretched long across the frontier. Yet for the first time, she felt something close to peace. Not because her grief was gone, it never would be, but because she had turned grief into steel, into purpose. The town would tell the story 100 ways. Some would call her a murderer. Others would whisper she was a ghost in black silk, a curse sent to punish betrayal. But every tale would carry the same truth. The widow wasn't to be pitied. She was to be feared. And as the horizon swallowed her silhouette, I knew this story wasn't ending. It was only the beginning of a legend of love turned to vengeance, of betrayal burned into dust, of a widow who rode into the West, carrying death in one hand and justice in the other. If you've followed Lila's ride this far, I thank you. These lands are full of stories of love, loss, and vengeance, carved into the dust of the West. If you want to ride with us again, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this tale. Until next time, may your trail be steady and your heart unbroken.